Hey everyone, welcome back to the OrtoTech Garage. My name is Keith. Today I'm working on this pretty cool 2015 Honda Civic. We're going to be installing this K&N cold air intake system. A lot of you guys out there are installing these systems. I get a lot of requests from my clients to have me install it for them. This process is fairly simple and it's certainly a project you can handle at home. So I want to walk you through all the tips and tricks that I have to install this system properly at home so you don't have to bring it in and pay for somebody else to do it. Let's pop this hood and get right into it. All right guys, before we get started, I've got all these parts laid out that we're going to need to do this job. This is everything that was included in K&N's cold air intake kit for this car. I've got here the air filter. This is the conical style filter that you can see. And then there's a hose clamp with that. I've got a bunch of hose clamps here for the duct work. There's some hoses included. We need one for the PCV system, crankcase breather, and then one for the coolant bypass hose, hardware, nuts and bolts, some glue, a heat shield. This is the retainer for the air filter, the stand for it. There's a seal over here as well. And then of course I've got the instructions and the horsepower claims here from K&N. They're saying that this kit will give you 3.1 additional horsepower peak and 2.1 pound-feet of torque peak. So just keep in mind this is going to be at a very specific RPM, not through the entire RPM range. And I really wanted to point out to you guys, a lot of people like putting these in here, but once you install this, you're not going to feel a whole lot different as far as horsepower. It's very difficult to feel, 2 or 3 horsepower. It's just, without a dyno, you're not going to notice the difference much, but it should certainly sound a lot better. I think you might hear some of the air drawing through this air filter a little more than you would in that factory box that's sealed up pretty tightly. So definitely going to sound a little bit cooler. We'll give you a tad more horsepower, and it's just a whole lot of fun to put in, so let's get right into it. Before we get started on this job, I want to show you some of the tools we're going to need for this. I've got a razor knife, a 1/4-inch drive ratchet, a flat blade screwdriver, a 10mm open-end wrench. I've got a pair of dikes or side cutters, a couple of pairs of pliers, just your standard pliers, and then some long needle nose pliers to get our hose clamps off. I have a hose hook tool similar to this one. I'm going to be using a 19mm wrench. It's going to help tighten up the fitting on the pipe. A long extension is going to really help you get a couple of these bolts out. I've got a Milwaukee driver here with a 1/4-inch bit on it, and then a few sockets. I've got a Phillips driver bit. I've got a 3mm, 4mm Allen socket, and then I've also got a 10mm, 8mm, and a 1/4-inch drive to get some of our hose clamps on and off. This should be everything you need, and maybe a little bit of coolant. Some brake cleaner and a rag will help clean your throttle body out, and that should get you through this whole job. As per K&N's instructions, the first thing I want you to do is disconnect the battery. Probably for this video's sake, I might actually just remove the battery so it's not in our way at all. This way you have the best views and angles that I can show you exactly what's going on here. Be careful with these plastic connectors here. They shouldn't be too tight on here. It's just really threading onto this stud. So if you're going to take your battery out as well, don't break these. Always disconnect the negative of the battery first, and then the positive. This is the battery hold down. We want to take this off. We'll switch to a deep socket. These studs are fairly long. And I like to leave these on just a little bit. Don't take the nuts all the way off. This just allows you to manage this a little bit better. We turn these little J hooks to get them out of the holes. And then you can take this whole thing out by itself, or even better yet, we can take the whole battery out and everything at one shot here. Don't forget your battery tray. All right, so the next step, we need to access this air box here. So we're going to take this whole piece out. There's a couple of bolts here, and one down here, and then one on the side over there. We're going to loosen those up. We need to take this intake duct off as well. We're just going to pull this rubber boot off the end of here. And a little screwdriver should be enough to peel this out of here. Okay. All right, next I want to take this clamp off of here. I'm using a socket because it's hard to get a screwdriver in here. The nice thing is this has a hex head on it. It's very small. I believe this is 5.5 millimeter. 5.5 millimeter head on this little clamp. So instead of using a screwdriver, go ahead and if you have a 5.5 millimeter socket, you can use that on the clamp. Now one thing I wanted to show you here, if you guys take a look at this. Right here you can see there is a crack in the intake duct. And I've talked about this in my other videos. I have one on 10 common air filter mistakes that I see. And this is a popular problem right here. I just wanted to demonstrate it while we got it apart. You can see the bellows boot is ripped. So what's happening is the air is coming in the bottom here. It's getting filtered. It's supposed to go through this ductwork and into the engine, but it's also pulling in air that hasn't been filtered through this crack. Okay, this can also cause drivability problems because we have a mass airflow sensor that's ahead of the crack. So this air that's getting sucked in through this crack is not being calculated by this mass airflow sensor, and this creates a drivability problem sometimes. So you got you guys be extra careful here when you're doing these air filter changes that you don't pull on this and rip the bellows boot like this one is. This is stuck on a grommet back there. There it goes. Okay. Oops. Get this out of the way. I think we're going to remove this here too. This is just the bracket for the battery cable. It's going to give us a little bit more room to get this out in one piece. And once we get here to where you can access the wire for the mass airflow sensor, there's a little button here. You're going to want to depress this. Push in on the clip close to the sensor. So I'm pushing it towards me and I'm releasing the clip. You can see it lift up here. And then I'm going to pull it back out. Okay. Then we also have a connector here. It's a cable stay. We're going to want to squeeze that with a pair of pliers so we can release it. So grab both tabs, squeeze, and then you can pull that out. And you can see those two tabs, they snap in the hole. We just want to squeeze these to release it. So this is the crankcase breather hose. We need to pull this off the valve cover. And then we're going to have to change this coolant hose as well. This is the bypass hose. So we can release the clamps on there. Keep in mind you're going to lose a little coolant in here. So make sure that this car is cool before you take these hose clamps off. Okay. See, we're losing a little bit of coolant here. We're going to have to top that up when we're done. Okay, there's the other end. Okay. So this is the breather hose. It goes from the air intake duct across to the top of the valve cover. And then this is the coolant bypass hose with the pipe which connects to this hose. Okay, we're going to be discarding this piece with the K&N kit. So in here we have another hose clamp we have to take off to get the other end of this duct off the throttle body. So it's stuck behind this little wiring harness here. Same thing, 5.5 millimeter head. And if you have some electric tools like an electric air ratchet or an air ratchet of some sort, you can use that or just loosen it up by hand, which is what I'm going to do here. So now we have a hose here that we need to pull off of the duct. There's a, I don't know if you can see in here, there's a little clamp basically that holds it in place. Doesn't require any tools, just pull it out. The same thing here for this harness. Just pop it out. Okay. And then we're going to pull this ductwork out of the way. We're going to be replacing this as well. All right, guys, we've already talked about the problems that I see with the air intake duct bellows getting torn because people are trying to lift up the air box. But one other thing you should be looking at, as long as we're this far into this job, I want you to look at the throttle plates on here. Look inside the throttle body. And we're going to get you a close-up here, but I want you to look inside and see if there's any carbon buildup around the throttle plates. If there is, This one has a tiny bit. This is a good time to get a little bit of cleaner on a rag and wipe that out. If you have a lot of buildup in there, it's possible you may have to do a throttle body relearn on it. Most cars will adapt to the cleaning without a problem. There's a couple out there like Nissan and things that are going to give you some trouble, some fits if you don't have a scan tool to recalibrate that. So car like this, though, you should be fine. It's got a very little bit of buildup in there. We're going to clean that out while we have it apart, and then we'll proceed in reassembling everything here with the K&N kit. So this is your throttle body. It is electronic. It has an electronic motor on the side. And in here, you want to look for carbon buildup, that black soot that builds up around this gold throttle plate. And that's where we'll want to go ahead and clean a little bit around there, okay? This you can open with your finger manually. Do not drop anything in here. Absolutely no piece of your glove, no rag, no dirt, nothing. We want to just go ahead and spray some cleaner on a rag and then wipe this out just a tiny bit if it looks dirty on your car. So a little bit of brake or carburetor cleaner is fine for cleaning the throttle body out. I'll just spray some, saturate the rag here. Make sure you don't have anything loose that can pull off the rag here and get inside the throttle body. We definitely don't want to do that. So find yourself a corner that's fairly neat. And then I'll stick a couple of fingers in here and just wipe this thing out. Now the computer will adjust for a dirty throttle body over time. The problem is if it gets too dirty over a long period of time, it'll start to affect the idle quality of the vehicle. So this is why I tell you to inspect this while we have it off. It's a good time to get in there and clean it up a little bit. You can see all of the carbon buildup that's coming out of there, okay? And we've got it cleaned up and looking pretty tidy. The next step in this procedure here, now that we've got everything removed, I've got one more hose I've got to take off the throttle body here. This is the other side of that bypass hose. It's got a spring-loaded clamp on it. Just move that up and out of the way, and then we'll go ahead and pull this off like we did the other ones. Just give it a little bit of a twist or a pry. Let's see. This one's a little bit stuck on there. All right, so this is a good opportunity. I'll show you another tool here. If you have a little bit of a pick, a hose hook like this one will work good to get underneath there. We're going to see if we can get this in here. Just enough to pull up on this. Okay. I'm just going to pry up on the end of the hose without destroying it. Okay, and then this should pull off. There it goes. I just wanted to show you guys, this is the other end of this assembly. This is where this connected on here, okay? So we're replacing all of this piece, the two rubber hoses here, the rubber breather hose, and the metal pipe assembly. All this stuff is going to be discarded. You may want to save these parts with your original air cleaner in case you decide to take this filter kit back out in the future. All right, now I've got this coolant hose that we need to replace. We took those two rubber coolant hoses off. We took the pipe out that was in between the two rubber hoses, and we're going to replace all that with this one solid piece of hose here. Going to go from the throttle body over here to the coolant housing right next to this EGR valve. There's a little pipe sticking up, and we're going to connect this hose to both of those, okay? And that's how this is supposed to go. And then we do have new clamps they gave us with the kit. But what I wanted to show you guys, these clamps are really big. They're not the appropriate size for this hose, and I don't think I'll be using them on there. I'm going to reuse the factory spring-loaded clamps on here. These will maintain a constant tension over time. And these, if I put this on here and tighten it up, it's going to have a lot of metal sticking out the end because I'm going to have to tighten it up so much. So I think I'm going to bypass using these and stick with the original hose clamps. Push that down. Then here's our spring-loaded clamp. Go ahead and squeeze this. Make sure it doesn't pop and hit you in the eye. And we'll slide that on there. Okay. Move it up enough. And then I want to show you something here as well. These coolant hoses have a fat spot on the very end of it. They call that the barb. Okay. So you want to make sure the clamp is sitting somewhere in this range, below this fat spot, the barb. Okay, and what that's going to do is going to allow it to squeeze on the skinniest part and not slide off over the barb over time once this gets under pressure. Okay, so we're going to push this hose all the way down until it seats here, and then we'll put that clamp right in between the fat spot there and the fat spot there. Hope that makes sense to you. Let's squeeze that clamp and slide it down. Now, you should be able to feel inside the hose where that barb is. Okay, and make sure you put this clamp in a spot where you can easily get to it later. We'll try to rotate it forward a little bit. Okay, and then not all the way to the bottom. You want to go right in that skinniest part of the pipe that I showed you, right below the barb if you can. So I'm actually going to raise this up just a tad. All right, same thing with this one. Okay, we should be good there. The next step here is to install this offset hose. One side here, this diameter is smaller than this side, and we're going to put this smaller side on the throttle body. I want to make sure we're putting these clamps in an area that you can get to them, and then I try to make them so they're in the same spot, just a neater install that way. So we'll go ahead and put that on. We're going to tighten the clamp to the throttle body, which is the smaller one, and then we still have to fit some other parts in here before we tighten the other clamp. Kind of the same thing I told you before. If you look here, it still has a barb on the throttle body. There's a little pop out at the very tip, and you want the hose clamp to sit in that smaller spot in between, the smaller diameter. So the clamp should be sitting in here, not up on the barb. You don't want this thing to pop off. Now, like I told you, with the factory hose clamps that we took off, had a 5.5 millimeter head on it. These standard ideal type hose clamps, they have an 8 millimeter head or 5/16 head, so you can go ahead and use an 8 millimeter socket to tighten up these hose clamps instead of a flat blade screwdriver. All right, I should mention, give it a little tug, make sure everything's nice and snug on there. It's not going to come off. And if you are using a ratchet and a socket to tighten up your hose clamps, don't over tighten them. It's easy to do that and strip out the gear mechanism in there. You know, just snug it up. It doesn't have to be super tight, okay? The next step here is to install this short hose. This one has the same diameter on both ends. This is going to go on the air intake duct right here, this plastic pipe that we pulled off with this oval shape on it. So we've got 2 hose clamps. We're going to fit this on here first. So for the purposes of this demonstration, I wanted to take this duct work off. This is the cold air duct to supply air to the air box or to the air filter. And I wanted to just show you, if you can take a look here, that this shape here is not a perfect circle. It's more of a square oval. Okay, so you might get a little struggle putting this on like I did. Just go ahead and start at the bottom, you know, and then pull it up and over around the edges. If you have to get a little screwdriver and work it while you do that, you can do that. If you want to put just a little dab of water or something on the inside of this ductwork, that might help lubricate it just a tiny bit to help you get it up and over this ductwork because it's an irregular shape. I'm going to put this back in. So before we get any deeper on here, I want to explain to you there are a couple of different types of hardware in this kit that they've provided. We've got some standard 6 millimeter by 16 millimeter long hex head bolts. They've provided 5 of those for us. But we also have some 6 millimeter by 16 millimeter bolts here with an Allen head on them. So these Allen head bolts have to go on this bracket here. These other bolts are for the other locations. They're notated here in the diagram and the instructions. If you just look in there, you'll see that bolt O is the one with the hex head on it, and then bolt L is the one that has the Allen head on it. So I just want to clarify, if you guys are doing this at home, this way you make sure you're using the correct hardware in the spots they want you to use it. As we proceed here, the next step for us is to assemble this bushings to this bracket here, and we're going to be using those hex head bolts I told you about with a split washer or lock washer and a flat washer. And then we're going to install them up and through the bottom of this into these rubber insulators. One here and one here. And then we'll tighten these up with a 10 millimeter socket. Now that we have this bracket assembled with the 2 bushings on it, we're ready to install this in the car. We're going to use another one of these 6 millimeter by 16 bolts with the hex head, split washer, and a flat washer. We're going to install it over here where the airbox front bolt was mounted. So if you look here, this is the hole that we're going to install this bracket onto. Now this bracket will move a little bit, so I suggest that you put it in and maybe leave it slightly loose for now so it wiggles. This way, once we get the other piece in there, we can make sure that it's in the correct spot. We can still move it around a little bit. Once we get this installed with the other bracket on top, and we got our studs through the bracket and nuts on them, then we can tighten up this one as well. I've got this heat shield here. The back hole requires a grommet, but the grommet has to first come out of the existing air box. This rubber piece has to be removed on here. So a lot of times you can push the small end through, and sometimes they're a little bit tight in here. I do recommend if you have some WD-40, you can just kind of spray that around the rubber, and that'll help help it slide through a little bit easier. So maybe you could push it by hand without a big hassle. Okay, so now that it's out, we're going to just reinstall that at the bottom of this metal bracket. Same thing with the little WD-40, get it in there, try to slide it around a little bit. See if you can rotate it into place. Okay? And you'll see the entire head of it sticking all the way through, all the way around. And that's how you know it's installed properly. All right, the next step is to install this edge piping on the bracket. Now they want you to wrap this all the way around the perimeter here, around the edge here, and then back up. I think when I get to this corner over here, I'll probably cut it, and then we'll continue around. Let's see how it fits. I think this is the spot where I just want to cut it. It's changing directions and doing a 90-degree turn. So we'll go ahead and trim it right here and continue on. You can use a pair of side cutters, or dikes as they're commonly referred to. And you'll see how nice that can butt up here now to the edge with it trimmed. And we'll continue around now with a fresh piece. I should mention this has a metal insert here at the bottom half of this strip. That's what gives it some structure. So it does take a little bit of force here to kind of pry it on and have it stay in place. Okay, and I want to do the same thing right here at this corner. I'm going to go ahead and cut this so we can continue on. Just make sure if you have a little sharp edge here like I did, you clip that off so it doesn't get you later in the future when you take something apart. We've got a little bit left over, so I want to try to get this length exactly right so it holds this little piece that wraps around here in place. So I think I'm going to cut it right about here. Probably going to have about an inch or so left over. Might cut a little short first, see how it fits. I want to try to hold this piece in place with this one. It's got a little sharp edge sticking out. All right. I think that's about as nice as it's going to get here. The next step is to install this in the car. We're going to put this on that bracket with the two posts that we installed previously. I will take a little bit of this WD-40 and just spray it in the center of this grommet here. Like I said, that just helps it slide on easier. This way you're not fighting the rubber sticking on the metal stud that's back here. So if you look back here, this is the metal stud in the rear. Okay, we want to move this wire out of the way. We're going to need that later. But we're going to push this grommet onto that stud, and then these two studs here are the ones with the threads on them. And that's going to allow us to go through these holes here. Before we install this bracket, we want to put these two hose clamps back on this air intake duct. Okay, we previously put on this rubber O-ring intake duct, but we want to go ahead and put some clamps on here because once we put the bracket in, we're going to need to install this hose. So I'm going to loosen this clamp up as much as I can. See if I can get it all the way on here. Okay. Don't forget to put these clamps in an area where you can easily get to them. I'm going to loosen this clamp up as well. We'll install it next to this one. This way when we're ready to put that heat shield in, it's ready to slide this clamp in place and install it. Okay. Let's put that heat shield in. Okay, again, we're going to install this grommet. It's going to go over this big stud in the back. And then this piece that we've installed previously with the 2 threaded studs is going to go through these 2 holes here. And we'll need to make sure we get the hose seated around this part of the heat shield. So now that I've got this shield in place where I want it, and it's lined up to the holes in the shield with the 2 threaded studs, I'm going to come back in here with a 10mm wrench, and I'm going to tighten up that 3rd bolt that was on the bracket that we left loose earlier. So you have to get it from the side. They don't leave you an access hole here. So if you just use your open end wrench, you can feel for it under there and just snug it up. This way it's in the right spot. Otherwise, you're going to have trouble doing that later. Okay. Push that down. We're going to install our hose here. Okay. Now, once you've got your intake duct pushed in as far as you can, we'll want to tighten up these hose clamps. Okay. They're going to be a little tricky to get to with this battery cable in the way. So you're just going to have to work around it a little bit. I just want to put it right at the edge here. Line up my clamps nice. See if I can get this pushed in as far as it goes, and then tighten this up. Okay. And if you look in here, just make sure this is pushed on as far as it can possibly go. I'm basically touching pieces on the inside. If I stick my hand in here, I can feel them together. So just make sure you've got it clamped on all the way, and then tighten this other clamp as well. Okay, now it's time to put 2 nuts and 2 washers on the 2 studs underneath this heat shield. So the next couple of steps here are going to involve removing the mass airflow sensor from the factory air box. We need to install it into this metal pipe, and then we're going to put some glue on here, and we're going to install this here so the opening will fit around the tip of the mass airflow sensor. And this has got to get pushed all the way in. They want it glued in place. So once we put some glue on it and we've forced it in place, we want to make sure it's exactly where we want it. It's not going to come out of there once the glue is dry. This is super glue they've given you in the package. Let's do that. Just a Phillips screwdriver here. We'll take these factory bolts off the mass airflow sensor. Okay, and then this should just pull out nice and gentle. Be careful not to damage anything on here. This is going to be reinstalled in this new pipe. Okay, so this will go right into here. Now it's important to note there is a seal on here, a rubber seal. Make sure that comes out with the old one. It should be stuck on the sensor. If it's not, pull it off of there and put it back on the sensor. You'll see a groove in here. It's machined into this, and that's where that rubber seal should sit in there. Okay, so it should sit nice and flush. And then you can use the provided bolts they've given you. These are Allen head. They're very small. I believe it's another 5mm. Let's see where we're at here. It's actually a 3mm Allen head in order to tighten these up with the provided hardware from K&N. Just make sure it's sitting flush before you snug these up. Okay, not too tight. And then we're ready to put a couple of drops of glue on here. And then we're going to put this in so that it sits around that part in there. I only get one shot at this, so let's make sure we get it in there right. Perfectly lined up. I like the way that looks. Hopefully you can see in there. The last step of assembling this, we're going to install this fitting. It's got pipe threads on it, so we just want to run it in until it's snug, and then we'll tighten it up maybe about a turn until it feels tight. All right, the next step, we're going to install this ductwork with the small diameter and the large diameter. This one's going to go on this pipe we just assembled. So let's go ahead and push that on. Make sure it sits on there far enough so that it's seated all the way around. Put your clamp on it. All right, now that we've got our duct work, the rubber duct installed on the metal duct, we're going to go ahead and we're going to give this a little test fit here. So this is going to have to go over here. And I want to make sure that this clamp is somewhere where I can get to it before I tighten it. So I'm just kind of giving it a test fit. I like to put it kind of straight up and down. Usually makes the most sense. Put it towards the end. This one has no barb on it, so you'll just have to get it close. Get a little straighter here. We'll just snug that up. And that's a pretty good test fit right there. This is going to push in here. Now again, you want to make sure this sits in far enough, at least maybe about an inch or so into this rubber boot, okay? And once you're in there pretty well, it's okay to tighten this up. Now this is going to be another one. I'm going to have to use the ratchet again. This is not going to tighten up nicely without using the ratchet. So if you have your 8mm socket still handy, put that on the ratchet and we'll get going. Now I'm just going to run this in a bit. I want to hold it in place, but I want to make sure I can turn this a little because I have to install this other bracket we're about to assemble. Let's do that. The next step is to install these two pieces together. This is going to sit over here. Line up your holes the best you can. And then we're going to use those two bolts that had the Allen heads on them with split washers or lock washers and flat washers. This requires a 4mm Allen head. We're going to take the clamp that goes on the big end of that little piece of ductwork, and we're going to take our bracket we've just assembled. This is going to get installed in the big end. Make sure you put your clamp on first. Once again, make sure the head of your hose clamp is in an area where you can get to it and aligned with the other one just to make it look neat. We're going to install this in here. And then once you've got your bolts lined up, just go ahead and tighten those down. There are threaded holes in the bottom of the heat shield that these tighten into. You'll probably need an extension on here of some sort to get to them. All right, the next thing I want to do here, I want to push this all the way in to make sure it's seated all the way. Put my hose clamp where I want it. And while I'm holding all that together, I'm going to go ahead and tighten up this hose clamp. And that one. Okay, so now everything is secured. You can see both clamps are in place. I've got the heads for the clamps right here where I can easily access them. This way if I need to take something apart in the future, it's easy to get to. The bolts down below on either side are tightened into the heat shield. And then the last clamp I want to finish tightening is the one that I didn't tighten before. I left that one loose, if you remember, because I wanted to make sure that we could put this where we wanted it. So we're going to tighten that up next with the ratchet. Now the next step is I need to plug this mass airflow sensor back in. And it's pointing down to the bottom over here. So just make sure you can run your cable over along the side of this heat shield and plug this in. Make sure you hear it click when you put it in. We're almost there, guys. We got a couple pieces left to install. We're going to install this breather hose from the valve cover over here to the fitting that we've screwed into this fat metal pipe, okay? So go ahead and push one end on here. And then route this up to your valve cover. Now, if you can see here, this hose is a little bit long. I'm going to trim this down because I want to have a clean installation. I could probably fold this thing, but it's just not going to look great. So what we're going to do is we want to sit it about where I think it's going to go, and then I'm going to cut about this much off of the hose. Right. Okay, now this should fit on here. Perfect. All right, so the last thing, I'm going to put this factory hose clamp, the spring clamp, back on the top of the valve cover after I get this hose on here. Now, this fitting that we had on here, that we screwed into this silver pipe, had a bunch of barbs on it. It should hold itself in place pretty well, but this is just plastic over here, so I'd feel better just putting the original hose clamp back on at the valve cover, if we can. Now, it's not the best fit in here, but it will work. It's just got to pass some air through it, so I've got a slight kink in there. Just make sure it's not closed off at all. As long as it can flow some air in here, you should be good. All right? All right, we're ready to install the air filter onto this giant cone assembly. Again, we'll make sure your hose clamp is going to be in a spot you can get to it. Make sure it's on the filter. We'll slide it into place. If you have some identifying marks like this K&N, you may want to just have it so it reads upright. It's not going to change anything. It just looks a little cleaner for your install. And as a matter of fact, I might put this clamp on the other side over here. I'll flip it around so that it lines up with my other two clamps over here. And we're going to go ahead and snug that up. All right, we're ready to reinstall the battery tray and the battery. Just wipe it out, make sure there's no dust in there. Now, I wanted to mention on here, I noticed while installing this, there's no way to put the bracket in. This bracket that we removed holds this battery cable. It clips in right here where my thumb is. And there's no way to reinstall this with this K&N shield in place. So we're gonna have to discard this as well. Slide our battery cover back into place. And then our battery hold down will go back in. You catch those J-hooks in the two holes in the battery tray. Okay. And we're going to tighten those up. Now, one trick I like to do here when I'm putting these hold downs back in, I like to pull up on this a little, but don't get your fingers pinched underneath. But if I pull up on this, it'll keep the J-hooks from popping out while I tighten these up. So run them in a little bit at a time. I'm pulling up on it, but don't get your fingers pinched, because as you get close, you could have a chance to tighten your fingers underneath it, and we don't want to do that. Okay, so the battery's in the battery tray where it belongs. The hold down is right down the middle of the battery. Snug that up. And then we've got a couple of things left here. We're going to get our battery cable back routed where it belongs. We need to install this positive end. If you guys haven't watched my battery installation videos, make sure that you're putting your battery terminal on and it's seated all the way down. Your battery cable seated all the way down on the terminal so that it's sticking up through the top. Okay, don't have it sitting up too far. You're not going to get a great connection on there like that. I've had to tuck this other piece down a little bit lower than it normally goes because this is in the way now with the K&N air filter installation kit. Tighten up your positive cable before you ever put your negative on. The negative will be your last connection. Push it all the way down. Okay, make sure it's all the way seated here. Tight. That'll complete the installation. So there you have it, guys. That's the full installation of this K&N cold air intake. It's a pretty clean installation. I think it looks nice. It sounds good. We're about to take this for a road test. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please, if you guys are enjoying our content, subscribe to our content. Hit that like button. Honk the horn so you get some notifications. And we'll see you in the next video. Got one for you right here. Have a good one.